Okay. I'm usually not the one also managing Zoom at the same time, so if I stop speaking to Toggle to try and let people in, my apologies already. Okay. Let's try to get started here. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a large crowd joining us both tonight in person, but also on Zoom virtually. Who knew Tudor houses would be that amazing on a Thursday night? I mean, wow. So thank you, all of you, for coming out to join us. We greatly appreciate it. We are also recording this, so we'll send out an email with a link to everyone so that you can listen later if you really feel so inclined, or for anyone who missed it so they can check in later. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Tudors themselves, and about the couple that actually designed and built them. It all starts with a family of developers, the Leonard family. Jacob Leonard is actually from Furbush and moved here mid-1840s. His father was a pastor, and that became a huge part of Jacob's life. He ended up being a coal merchant here. However, he very quickly started several other businesses that all had to do with his religious background. They had a printing house that was also a Bible house that also printed hymns and all kinds of religious texts. So he was a man that did many, many things. And Jacob was kind of the progenitor of the Leonard building family. I want to say as short-lived as they are. They were building for 2 generations, spanning nearly 70 years. So not too bad of a run. All right, so they moved when Jacob and his wife Jemima moved to Albany. They moved to Westerlo Street in the South End. They had 4 sons: Oscar, Alden, Edgar, and Jesse. Jesse being the youngest and the most important that we'll talk about mostly tonight. His other 3 sons, some stayed local, some did other things, but none of them were really heavily involved in the building business. But Jesse, that was his thing. No, it's for show. It's the second microphone we tried this evening, and apparently none of them will work. So tonight is an example of Murphy's Law, can I just say. So if you need me to speak louder, someone raise their hand and just remind me to speak up a little more. Better? I will do as best I can.
2 chairs up here. Okay.
All right, so most of our story begins around 1862 when Jacob Leonard purchases a tract of land between Delaware Avenue and New Scotland Avenue. At this point, he'd been a kind of small-time developer. He'd built a handful of houses all over Center Square, Hudson Park, the Mansion neighborhood. It's one here, one there, nothing big, no huge developments, no massive tracts of land. He's a small-time developer. In 1862, he buys 50 acres of land across from the penitentiary, which is now where the VA sits, intending to raise his family, but also build and do quite a bit. I'm sorry if I saw a hand. Let me let this person in. So he purchases this large tract of land. You can see on the map, there's 2 sections to this, right in the center being the parcel by the penitentiary, and the other being a western parcel in this area that was kind of way out in the middle of nowhere. There are railroad tracks there. It's kind of marshy. There's very little going on in the 1860s in the far western edge of the city, but not for long. There we go. Sorry, the screen is, oh no, it's hiding all of the awesome maps that I don't. You want to see the maps, not everyone trying to join. Wow, technology's not my friend today.
I just said the far western edge of the city, the something. What?
There wasn't much going on. So it was right around Washington Avenue and Manning Boulevard is the tract of land in the western edge of the city. So here's a close-up map showing a portion of the land that he bought by Delaware Avenue. It's turned oddly, but the tract that you can see here is right by where Hackett Middle School currently is. And this is the 1876 map. that we're looking at. And this is the kind of western end of that. Again, for this talk, this will be the more pertinent area. If you'll notice, the penitentiary is kind of toward the center of that map, right around here. And this tract of land is platted, but there's nothing here yet. There will be in the 1930s. The penitentiary is where the VA hospital is now. Yes, it was demolished, I believe around 1880. It didn't last very long. And then it kind of just sat there until the VA was actually constructed. All right, this is the western tract that Jacob purchased. You can see the waterway right there leading from 6 Mile. And that becomes kind of the presidential streets, as we refer to them most of the time, North Manning Boulevard, Buchanan, McKinley, all of the little bungalows over there. For heaven's sake.
Physically point on the screen.
Yes.
What it is that we're seeing, because it's clear to you, but.
If I can get this to hide so you don't see it, that would be even better. Thank you for your patience with my technological failings today. Oh, yeah. All right, we're gonna do this. So this is can you see it if I do? That's my question. It's awfully tiny. I've been moving it. All right, this is the area. That working? You can see it, yeah?
No.
That's what I thought.
How many teachers we got in the room right now?
Not me, just saying. It's this area over here where the blue outline is. Manning Boulevard, it ends up being, or North Manning ends up being where the waterway is. You've got Washington Avenue right here. Madison, that's why I'm saying you can't see the cursor. It's on there. You can't see it though. Can I go back and point with my hands? I feel like that would be more effective. Okay, thank you. This is pushed back, that works better, but it's so tiny. All right, so you've got Washington Avenue here. This is the waterway that leads from 6 Mile over to the Bleecker Reservoir. You've got Madison here, western there. So this is basically Manning Boulevard here, and then North Manning off to the side. So you've got McKinley, Buchanan, Garfield, all of that within this little blue area over here. Yeah? Fabulous.
They never realized.
All right. Back to my slides. Oh, for heaven's sake. All right, so Jesse, for heaven's sake, Jesse Leonard, as the youngest son of Jacob, is the one who really started building. He went to Amherst College, left school very early for health reasons, and moved out west and became basically a cattle rancher, providing cattle and food for many of the miners out in Colorado. And years later, attributed to all of his years as a rancher for why he lived 94 years and had such a long, productive life. He was really an interesting gent. As we were researching these buildings, we found lots and lots of articles about him, constantly visiting Europe, giving to this organization or that one. He was a big philanthropist. He even actually donated the land for Holland Avenue to the city, or tried to, in 1908. And the city said it wasn't really important. They didn't really need a road there. So thanks, but no thanks. Not long after, they realized that was not a great idea, and ended up buying the land from him for $15,000 in 1914. It also took many, many years later, as Holland Avenue wasn't actually paved until 1932. So they did not move fast on this. Yeah, Leonard, he shows up lots as a very, very interesting, curious character. He also had his hand in a lot of the same businesses his father did, still being a part owner of the book bindery and the hymn printing business. He was actually a part of a small religious newspaper that they wrote for children called The Little People. There's a bizarre copy of it at the Albany Institute. It's the only thing they have that has to do with Jesse Leonard there, and it was not what I was expecting when I was researching the Tudor houses on Holland Avenue. So yeah, he begins most of his career on Maiden Lane. Oh, actually, let me go back to this a little bit. his huge thing with buildings was that he wanted everyone to be able to own a home. The American dream was a huge thing for him. And so he started promoting all of the homes that he was building, namely Leonard Place. He and his father had kind of started small on the edge by Delaware Avenue, building several homes on Warren, later renaming it Leonard Place as it is today. Mercer, Providence. So they built all of these homes sort of on spec and then used them to market their business as, here are these two-family homes. You can live in one part and rent the other, and that pays your mortgage. They also had this rent-to-own program. And there's this whole booklet. I'm not going to go through every single page, but I mean, it's like 15 pages of how you too can live the American dream by buying a home from Leonard Realty. It's really amazing how they marketed all of these homes to people, and it was really toward women. A lot of the descriptions that they have in here are, their homes are easy to clean. The layouts are fantastic for raising your family. It's really interesting, and it's the first time we've really encountered that kind of marketing for homes. Usually you're in the city and they're talking about, well, you can get out of the gritty city, very, Beaux-Art and public health movement, same time, where there's fresh air and you can have a lawn for your children to run around in. And yeah, it's just crazy the way they start marketing all of the things that they're building. So throughout Leonard's lifetime, he ended up constructing over 650 homes between the small cluster by Hackett and then the much larger cluster where the presidential streets are. But he had huge grand plans to build University Heights. So they owned all the land in between Delaware and New Scotland. And so that was his big dream, was he was going to build this massive brand new neighborhood that was going to connect these two huge turnpikes into Albany. And it never really went anywhere, which in the newspaper articles, you can tell he was a bit crushed by that, because all the papers were really building this up. And then he kind of retired and only 6 homes were built on Holland Avenue, as opposed to this massive undertaking that he was really planning. He passed away at the age of 94 and quote unquote retired, but still was pretty active in the business from what we can find right up until his death. Interestingly enough, in his will, he donated most of his money to charity. He was a confirmed bachelor his entire life, had no children. He did disinherit Albany Academy, so whatever they did, he was very unhappy with them toward the end. I think he had a codicil the last 10 years of his life that basically struck out the Academy from getting anything from his estate. But the majority of it was left to his housekeeper, live-in secretary, Josephine Johnston, who really became the most interesting character about these buildings. So Ms. Johnston is a Canadian immigrant. She moved here as a very young child in 1891 with her single mother. She first shows up in the city directories in 1919 as the housekeeper for Mr. Leonard at his home and business at 61 Maiden Lane. There's no other record of her doing anything else at this point. She wasn't a teacher, any other things that we usually see women pop up as in the directories. So she shows up as his housekeeper. Every year from that, she has different positions and she's constantly showing up more and more. She then becomes his secretary. And then she becomes a draftsman for Leonard Realty by 1940. There's several newspaper articles toward the end of her life that start talking about the fact that she was actually a designer for over 600 of Leonard's buildings. So here's a woman that has no formal education, training in architecture, design, nothing, who seemingly has much more of a hand in the design of these buildings. By 1953, there's a fantastic article, which of course is hidden by Zoom right now. Yes. Talking about the new headmaster's home for Albany Academy, which maybe this had something to do with disinheriting because it happened right about the same time. Thank you, Bria. So in 1953, there was an amazing article that actually gave a huge description of a lot of the work that Ms. Johnston did for the Leonard Realty Company. Not only was she keeping them organized and getting their bills paid, but she was actually the one doing most of the design work for all of the homes they were building. So if you live in one of the bungalows on the presidential streets, it was most likely designed by Josephine Johnston, who also designed the Holland Avenue Tudors. We have no known women architects at this point that are really touted or lauded in Albany, so hopefully she will be the first. She passed away 1 year after Jesse's death. She was 20 years younger and only survived 1 year later. They have a shared headstone at Blooming Grove Cemetery over in DeFriestville, which is just fascinating because the rest of his family is all Albany rural. So there's a much bigger story there to tell. We're just not telling it tonight. So the Tudors, what we all want to talk about. My first slide has a few newspaper articles. There was actually a lot of press coverage when these buildings were first built. As I kind of said a few minutes ago, they were supposed to be the beginning of this large development of Tudor houses. And the newspaper articles that talk about them talk about how they're this kind of unique style for Albany. We don't have very many, but Albany deserves really high style, grand architecture. And because of that, Leonard really wants to build this entire community of Tudor homes. It's what Albany deserves. So they were doing tours of all of these homes. You can see the 1936 article, another English Tudor home now open for inspection. So they were constantly opening all of these buildings to the public and getting a lot of press about them, which was really kind of wild at the time. They were built, not say one by one, but in groups from 1933 to 1937. So I'm going to show some pictures, which I think is what most people really want to see, and talk a little bit about the history for each one as we go. So this is 100 Holland Avenue, which actually became the retirement home for both Jesse and Josephine. They lived here from 1939 until both of their deaths. He actually left her the house, and all taxes and any expenses for the building were actually supposed to be paid out of his estate for the entirety of her lifetime, which didn't last that long. $5,000. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Here was constructed.
1933. So this was the first one that was built, and it was basically a show house until they lived there. So it was actually the last to be occupied.
Maybe for a period of time in which the Tudor style was considered contemporary and hip, right?
It was, yes. So the Tudor revival style was really taking off in the 1920s. There was this large push for more eclectic styles. Art Deco didn't take off here, but you saw a lot of colonial revival, Dutch colonial revival, Tudor style. It became this kind of mishmash of different cottagey styles and whatnot. But ironically, the Tudor style did not wildly take off in Albany. There's a handful really scattered throughout the city. Buckingham Pond has a few. There's 2 or 3 off of New Scotland. This is the only area where you actually have like a concerted cluster that was intentionally built together in that style as a development. And the buildings are fantastic. If you look at McAllister's Field Guide to American Architecture, they hit every single mark for what you'd be looking for in a Tudor style house. They have multiple gables. They're front facing. They have hipped gables. There's usually leaded glass or casement windows. They're half timbered, which you can see on the second floor. There's all of that kind of wattle and daub looking stucco and woodwork. They have really irregular brick and stone, very typical of the revival style. They have, massive chimneys that are very prominent. So every single detail or hallmark trait you would look for in a Tudor revival house, all of these houses just have in spades. This one's just remarkable. You can see here, I just trying to make sure I'm not blocking anyone out. Too many things at once. All right. Yeah, so this is the east side of 100 Holland. You can see the chimney work here, the mix of stone and all the different, how some of it sticks out and there's multiple flues, and they're really just absolutely wild. So a lot of these pictures are older and some of them are blurry, but I felt blurry pictures were better than none. So we were going to run with that. So all of the houses have this same type of stained glass, and not every pane was. It's not that some of it's missing. It was just kind of patched in here or there, and most of them have that kind of like swishing pattern and these shields and crests that show up in every house. So every house has very similar but also different traits. None of them has exactly the same footprint or all of the same details, but they all share a combination of the same details, if that makes sense. The back isn't something that's always seen, so I show that too, why not? But the interior is what you're really looking for. So this is the inside of Jesse's house. Oh, come on. It has this marvelous, massive fireplace, another hallmark of the Tudor style. But the plaster work in these homes is absolutely exquisite. One of the criteria for local listing is that it was the work of a master craftsman. These homes were absolutely the work of a master craftsman. The first floor, every room has different textured plaster. So the crest you see here is all actually a combination of pressed in and standing proud of the plaster. There's a lion in the middle for the Leonard family. And then the plaster to the sides of it all has kind of a linen pauperous texture on it that it's very Egyptian when you see it in person. Most of the first floor rooms also have all different parquet floors. They have exposed timbers, like you can see in the picture on the right. The staircases all have wrought iron railings. I mean, it's just very rusticated, very, very Tudor interiors. And they all have these really beautifully paneled dining rooms. The entryway is one of my favorite things about Jesse's house. If anyone knows, there's a somewhat famous mosaic from Pompeii that they had uncovered that looks exactly like this. So someone has obviously been visiting Italy as he was designing his house. In addition to the regular stained glass, the entryway of Jesse and Josephine's home actually has colored panel glass, which sets it off a little bit. You can tell their house has more details than any other house. I also say, it's funny, even before we knew about Josephine, we used to laugh about how it was definitely designed by a woman because it had the most impressive walk-in closet I had ever seen. I mean, shelves, drawers, wow, that was done very, very well. Their house also has a small, almost like a solarium or conservatory off the side. You can see the plaster over here is textured with palm leaves and ferns. But the highlight of the space, not only is it a great terracotta floor, but it has this marvelous fountain. The middle of the fountain is a fish, and water spews out of the fish's mouth. It's just amazingly awesome.
That seems like another Italian.
Yeah. I would assume so. The vases look a bit Greek, but yeah, it definitely, the tile definitely has more of an Italian feel. I had to show this because I think it's hilarious. On the right, you can see how the plaster was wood grained. On the left, you can see how a frat house painted their periodic table over it to add their flair to it later. Yes, college students will do amazing things. Some awesome, some not. Yeah. Oh, come on, it needs to change pages. There we go. This is a small office on the first floor in their house. I would assume it was actually the dining room because it connects to the kitchen through the door that's kind of cut off here. Like I said, their house had so many more features than all of the other ones. This area with the shutters over here was actually a space where they had shelves, so you could put all of the meal that was cooked and whatnot on the shelves, and then open it on the other side and take it out, so the staff doesn't have to come in the dining room with you. Clearly a house with staff as well. The drawings for a couple of these are at the Albany County Hall of Records, and you can tell how the buildings changed as they were building them, most likely based on whatever the desires were of the prospective buyer. That was one of the hallmark of the Leonard Building Company, was that they kind of had their standard textbook design, but you could alter it in pretty much any way you want. It wasn't just picking out, light fixtures and what kind of metal you wanted the toilet paper holder out of, but they really did customize homes for you. And so they really showed that, especially in the Tudors. Each one of them was ever so slightly different from the drawings they submitted to the city for their building permits. The bathrooms are amazing and Art Deco. Every house has a full bathroom on the first floor, and the bathrooms are all color coordinated. They're black and a different color. And they all had stained glass windows with flowers that were in the same color pattern as the tile. One house still has it. The tile is lavender and it has purple irises in the stained glass bathroom. It's pretty awesome. This is actually two different bathrooms, because you can see where the sink is on the left. In the picture on the right, it's actually a different sink with a different Art Deco surround. The one on the right was the upstairs master bath. The picture on the right's the walk-in closet, or part of the walk-in closet that we all admire. And the picture on the left was an upstairs study. So Josephine and Jesse were actually almost the only people to live there. After Josephine's death, it was sold to Ethel Smith in 1961. It was kind of held up in estate for several years. There was a huge debate over taxes and how much did Josephine owe on Jesse's estate and whatnot. So Ethel Smith had purchased it in 1961. She lived there for a very short period of time, and then it was kind of just owned and not occupied by her. We haven't seen a list of tenants or anything like that. In 1971, it was purchased by Michael Peacock of the Peacock Companies, and was lived in by actually various members of the Peacock family over the years. It was rented to students pretty much from the 1980s-ish up until 2010. This is one of the last buildings to actually go vacant, which is also when most of these pictures were taken. Most of these pictures were taken around 2010 when this building was just beginning to go vacant. We've been in them 2 times since then. So we try to check up on them, and we've been trying to work with the Peacocks over the years, and they've been good about giving us access. Small victories, I guess. But yeah, so we've been able to kind of track the condition of the buildings, and even despite being vacant, they've aged marvelously, even as they are. The next building is 104. 100 sat on a double building lot, so there is no 102. I did not skip one. As I was saying, each building's a little different. This one, you can see the chimneys in the front. It's got a little porch in the front, actually, and the porch to the side was originally glazed. This one is a little bit different. It begins the change into the modern world. The little wing that you see peeking out on the right is actually the garage. 100 and 104 were not built with garages initially, and then as soon as 104 was occupied, a garage was added on. The rest of them were all constructed actually with garages as a part of the building initially, showing that kind of transition into the automotive world. This house is great because this is one of the few that actually has all different colored slate on the roof, and actually has quite a bit of copper work on all of the little bays. You can actually see here by the entryway, they all had really great rusticated, very Tudory light fixtures, and most of the light fixtures are actually still there. Even on the inside of most of the houses in closets, they all still have either the little wrought iron fixtures or the detailed porcelain fixtures that they had that were also still very Tudor in style. Couple views at the side and the front. I don't know what the green lines are on it. I'm sorry. All right, interior of the house. So you can see the entryway kind of similar to Jesse's. They almost all have a little bench that was heated in the front entryway. They were thinking, I mean, I have to give Josephine credit, like small details, right? They matter. All of the entryways are tiled and they all have slightly different tile patterns. Whether they were picked by the owner or spec'd by Josephine, we may never know, but they are all slightly different. This fireplace here still has more of the detailed plaster work, again with another crest, kind of similar, a little smaller. At some point, someone thoughtfully painted it, so the lion is brightly painted. So the light fixture, the one on the left is blurry, unfortunately. That's what's left presently, and we found a light fixture very similar to it in a salvage shop. So most likely the fixture that actually existed there with the shade looked like the one on the right, which is pretty crazy. You can see too a little bit of the texturing of the plaster there. I wish I had a really good picture. The stairwell of Jesse and Josephine's home has bamboo going up the wall. There's the crest of the lion. I mean, details, right? Amazing details.
Was that from the fireplace?
Yeah, that was above the fireplace. Yeah, you can see it here. It's right there. And then a detail of it. All of the doors have these little covers on the windows and they're all wrought iron, but they're all different sizes and shapes. So it's not like they went through one catalog and we're like, we're just going to get 6 of these. Every one is different for every house. And they also have the little covers on the inside that you can cover it with. A little bit about the history of 104. It was built in 1933 for Elizabeth and William Hunter. He was a clerk for the Supreme Court. They lived there until 1944, actually under the Leonard Realty's rent-to-own program. So they paid rent on this building for 11 years and then finally owned it outright in 1944. They owned the building up until the 1970s, and then it was rented out to various students and whatnot. It was actually purchased by the Peacock family in 1979, after it had already been rented to students, actually by the Hunters estate or their children, for a few years. And this one was actually lived in into 2004. Okay, 106. This one starts to leave the pattern that had been established with 100 and 104 with different porches. It's funny, the ones in the middle, I don't want to say they're simpler, but the designs aren't, they don't have all the wings that stick out that the other ones do. But again, all different details, right? So this has a small little porch on the front. We had initially thought those little porches were kind of just add-ons later because they almost look like pressure treated wood that was just kind of rotting away. No, on closer inspection, they're actually original to the building, and all of the posts are actually shaped to look like pikes and textured, so it has more of a medieval look to it. Yeah, I mean, seriously, details on all of them. This house actually on the top half story in all of the gables, it has rough cut clapboards, so you have kind of the wavy edge of the wood on the bottom for all of them, which most of the other houses actually don't have. And the stonework on all of them is different. They all have a different combination of just kind of common red brick, clinker brick, which is usually a black, charred, often misshapen brick. It was usually on the outside of the kiln and it didn't do well in the bake. And it was very often thrown out, but it is used more in Tudor revival homes. And so these buildings have a lot of that. You can see here too how the front facades had the most detail. So all of the clinker brick and stone, most of it's on the front facade for 106. And as it wraps the corner, it gets into just a regular common bond of red brick, that they still use, black-ended brick to make a diamond pattern on the chimney. The other side of it, the other side of it has a little arch pattern in it. All of the sides of the houses that have just brick, the brick has a different pattern the way it was laid. It was left up to the masons to basically do whatever they wanted with it. So every house has a every house and every wall on the house has a distinctly different pattern for how the brick was laid. Which really makes them unique. The other Tudors that exist in the city, they all have very similar patterns. If they have wavy brick, it's a very consistent wavy brick, and you can tell who did them. There's about 3 houses that were definitely done by the same crew of masons, because they have exactly the same way that they lay their brick. These are just wildly different. You can see on the back of the house underneath the window over here, it has a herringbone pattern that just kind of starts and stops. It was literally whatever they felt like doing that day, that moment, that's what they did. And it really created this rich textural, feel to these buildings that really make them unique. On the inside, the wood here is a little bit lighter, whether it's that it was treated slightly differently, or was just a different, lighter wood. But you can see how the flooring is a lot lighter. Again, I don't want to say the middle houses are lesser in any way, because they're not, but they're definitely a bit simpler. They don't have wildly fancy parquet floors, but they do have a border of two-tone wood. And they don't have as much paneling. See, do I have a picture of it? No. Actually, kind of through the French door, you can see how there's these little cutouts that kind of lend visual entry into different spaces. The later homes, so 106 to 112, they have all these little cutouts that go from the staircase into the main living space or from the dining room into the main living space to make them seem bigger and more spacious than they actually are. But again, it adds all these different, details and character to the house. So everyone kind of fit the flair of the owner. 106 was built in 1936 for Harold Smith, who was the treasurer and general manager of WOKO, and the president, treasurer, and general manager of the Adirondack Broadcasting Company. They actually lived there for only a very short period of time, just 4 years. In 1940, the home was sold to Wilma and Charles Randolph. He was an attorney on State Street. And they lived there up until 1993 when it was sold to the Peacocks. Again, this one was rented up until 2010. Talking too much. I need to step, pardon me. All right. 108, you can actually see the garage that's on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, right-hand side. The left-hand side's the dining room. You can see through it. It's odd how they built it. So this one kind of goes back a little bit to the other design that has the kind of sloped roofs over the side wings, with the entry being set forward a little bit. And it has that little porch there. If you look really closely, yeah, I've got a better picture. The original light fixtures are still there on the front. A couple of the doors, but not all of them, also have really rusticated strap hinges to make it look much older than they are. Having just reproduced strap hinges just like that for the Van Oster Radliff house, they're not cheap and only a few people make them. You can see too, they stopped a lot of the kind of wild stone and brickwork just on the first floor. So the chimney, it doesn't even go all the way up on the first floor. So while it's not necessarily value engineering, they were definitely trying to highlight the first floor and the front of all of the houses. This side view over here shows one of the most blank side walls of any of the houses. And you can see the brick still has, a little dip and a little wave to it. At no point was it just laid like a regular brick wall. This house also has little dormers that pop out. Most of them don't, but this one does. And it has still little stained glass windows. It's amazing. Every space had these fantastic stained glass windows. The back door for most of them also had little porches off the back, where you can put your key in and not get soaked. They also have the little boxes for the milkman still, all of them. And they both have both the interior and the exterior doors to them. A lot of them, we find them coming into the warehouse. They get taken off and donated or trashed. Unfortunately, this is the one that has the stained glass window with the purple bathroom. So this is the outside. I wish I had an interior photo. But yeah, so this is actually a purple iris stained glass window to go with the lavender color tile in the bathroom. This one had some unfortunate lighting changes, but the stonework is still pretty great. And you can see here again how they has that same pattern with different tile work in the entry, the heated bench for you to sit on and take your shoes off. This little archway, instead of being open into the dining room, it's actually mirrored. And from seeing it in person, it was actually meant to be mirrored. It wasn't, they filled it in later. And it definitely makes that room seem much, much bigger. Well, the dining room doesn't have its original fixture. Upstairs had a lot of original light fixtures. This little one with a hand-painted glass globe is particularly sweet. Yeah, this is the downstairs, full bath. Yeah, lots and lots of yellow tile. It's just, I love how everyone had a theme and they just went all the way with it. All right, so what am I on? 108. So 108 and 110, these houses are awesome. So they were built by a pair of brothers that had a carpet cleaning business, Joseph and William Allen. They both married Helens. Right? So in 1936, the first one, 108, was done. And they moved in, and actually they lived there the entirety of the rest of their lives. Joseph passed away in 79, but Helen lived there until 2000 when she passed away, and her son sold it 9 months later in 2001. But her family actually has a small piece of the stained glass from her house framed. Hopefully we're meeting up with them in a couple weeks to get some family photos. But they love their grandma's house and still remain very, very connected to it. It was actually rented only a few years later, after it was sold to the Peacocks. It went vacant in 2004. William Allen lived there until the late 60s when he passed away, and then his wife sold it actually in 79. So this was in the Peacock family almost the longest. And this one had longer term tenants. I don't know if it had to do with the design of the building or what, but this one didn't have students. This had families renting the building for 5 to 10 years at a time, up until 2007. That's one, I think, the common misconception about these buildings is that they were all frat houses and student housing. Yes, some students did rent there, but also there were faculty from some of the colleges and families that were long-term tenants. Not everyone was transient. Most people who lived here did rent for either the entirety that they were in school or at least 3 years. So they definitely had even long-term, short-term tenants. All right, and that's 110, the other Allen family's home. And you can see the similarities between them each. This design is much more similar to 106, but has so much more stone in it. I'm curious how they determined how much stone and clinker brick went into each one of them. This one had very blank walls on the back sides, but you can see here how wavy it was. They also had a little porch. I don't know if you can see it here. On top of the garage, there was a little balcony that has the same kind of railings as the front. So it's not like it was an add-on mistake. There was actually a door that opened out and they had a little balcony on the garage. Why not? Another close-up of some of the brickwork. And that's the interior. Oh, I don't have a close-up of it. This light fixture in the dining room is absolutely wild. It's a bronze, very medieval like sconce that has like spikes that come down underneath where the light bulbs are. It's really awesome. This still has its original light fixtures by the fireplace. And they were really spectacular. There we go. I knew I had a better one in there. All right, the last one. This one was completed in 1937. It's the last house to be built by Leonard and the Leonard Realty Company. It was actually rented by the Leonard Realty Company up until Josephine's death. It was sold in 1959 by the remnants of the company to Rose Westeb, who was a receptionist at Albany Medical Hospital. But they lived there up until, I guess, really the late 90s. Her husband, Max, passed away in 75. And then the home was sold to a doctor who actually used it as his residence and practice. This one was sold in the late 90s to the Peacocks and was rented until 2004. This one, though, has the biggest porch on the side and actually the largest square footage of all of the buildings. This is the small porch on the side. You can see not only the stained glass, but the marvelous light fixtures, the beadboard, the arches. It has a flagstone patio. Really spectacular. I don't know if you can see from there, the pattern on the plaster is actually almost a diamond pattern that's been scratched into the plaster. While not as botanical, it's definitely not simple. They all had different patterns. Some of them even had more geometric shapes to it. There was a lot of almost like cross-hatching, creating cube-like shapes in the plaster in some of the later ones. Oh yeah, the doors are amazing. All of the woodwork is really spectacular, and in most of them, the majority of it is unpainted. So they're absolutely marvelous buildings. And again, most of these pictures are between 2010 and 2018. This one was actually taken in 18, and that's pretty much the worst of the damage that these buildings have dealt with. You can see some of the paint falling off from the ceiling. Despite the way they've been neglected, they're actually in shockingly good shape. So questions. If you're on Zoom, I'll have you put it in the chat. I know there have been questions that have been popping up. I'm going to have to go back and see them. But feel free to put your questions in the chat. Questions from the audience? Yes.
The whole row of houses is built on a berm. I would call it a berm. There's path up on the top and then the sidewalk down below. Why was that done?
My assumption would be that was the topography of the land at the time.
It seems so contrived.
It does, it does. From what we've seen of maps, there doesn't seem to be a massive amount of re-landscaping, but I wouldn't put it past him. You never know. Yes.
Seems what's very special about these houses is the individual, I don't know, vignettes of a wall, which is unusually done, or a stained glass window, or as I think you were mentioning, the texture of the different plastering techniques. Sometimes it was just the texture, sometimes it was like the whole wall appears to have been a composition, if you will. To what extent was that done ahead of time, and to what extent that's attributable to the individual craftsman or artist that was there? What did the architect actually say or define in the way of any of this? Was it just some note that says "be free" over here with your or was it actually laid out?
There's actually very little by way of specifications that we've been able to find. There's very little by way of specifications that we've been able to find. Most of the building permits are just drawings. There's no annotations to them. And they're mostly floor plans, exterior elevations. So it does not address the interior textures in any way. My assumption would be a good bit of it was left up to the craftspeople. I've noticed in Jesse and Josephine's home, that's the most detailed. So I'm assuming Josephine had a very strong hand in what went where. But interestingly enough, none of the drawings for any of the buildings built by Leonard Realty are signed. Most architectural drawings have either a small band that have, the architect's name and where their office is so other people can do business with them. Or it's listed in the specifications. Leonard's name is the only name that comes up, and he's just listed as the builder. There's no designer, there's no architect, there's nothing listed on any of the drawings. It's quite interesting. Yes.
I'm wondering when they started licensing or certifying architects and when they started requiring them to be behind any architectural plans. Because I know that's a thing now, but
It
when
is.
did it start?
I don't have a hard and fast answer to that. I know the American Institute of Architects records for licensing go back to the 19-teens. I don't know if they were licensing differently before then, but as early as the 1920s, there were already lists published of licensed architects. The city of Albany's building permit records go back to 1904. So we're actually able to see stamped drawings that have been signed off by building professionals and inspectors as early as 1904. So I don't have a hard and fast date. It was happening by this time.
So my theory is that Josephine did not have that accreditation because she was the talented engineer.
Absolutely. That seems to be the case. Yes.
The second house in, if you're looking at the line, I forgot the address of it. To the left of the building, I'm assuming by the plainness of it, was that little portion to the left of it a later addition?
It looks like it could have been.
Was there any other additions to any of the buildings that were later on?
The garages were the only things that seemed to be substantially added on, and that was just to the first two houses. 106 through 112 seem to be actually fairly pristine, with very few alterations. It's mostly like light fixtures and unfortunate carpeting. But the second house in, it looks like it could have been, or it may have been a porch that was altered, because it does have a similar building style to how the front porch was constructed. It has a projecting front porch and then that smaller glassed-in porch on the side that looks really odd, like there's something wrong about it, but you can't place why. So yeah. Pardon?
So the porch off of the living room towards Delaware Avenue was a sunroom that was added like in the eighties.
Oh, there you go.
And the same with 100, they had the same thing added on the other side. That was add-on.
That's where the garage came in on the other side too, right?
This would have been off the front living room to the Delaware Avenue side of the house. Both of them were on the Delaware Avenue side of the house.
Yes,
And they were add-ons, like,
even as late as the 80s.
yeah, I was there
Interesting.
in '70s. I lived at 104.
Nice.
And none of that was, well, actually Peacott's was there. The one on 100, Mike and Bill Peacott lived in, that was there
Mhm.
in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
And, but not at 104. That was added later.
There you have it. All right, there's one in the front.
Why was the Peacocks buying all the town?
Yeah,
Speculation,
but they haven't done anything.
not yet.
They're vacant now?
They are vacant, yes. Yes, they've all been vacant since 10 is the last time any of them were lived in. Yes, in the front, then on the side.
If they were year-round houses, how were they heated?
How are they heated? Radiators. They have radiators.
Steam.
Hot water or steam?
Steam heat.
There you go.
And is there a basement or are they built on a slab?
There's a basement. Because one of them has a very impressive bar with way too many cheap bottles of booze left in it. Like me. Yes, Richard. Oh, you're
Yeah, so they've all been vacant for a while.
Yeah.
I think they're all posted with the red X.
Yeah.
And,
Some of
I'm
them, yeah.
wondering, I assume they're registered vacant with the city, but I'm wondering, how is the structural integrity, monitored, maintained? Are they just being left to deteriorate? Which might be part of the top plan, but, so basically the question is, how are they being maintained? How is the structural integrity being monitored?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the question was about structural integrity of the building and how it's being monitored. They do register them every year, which doesn't necessarily require an engineer's report or anything like that. I don't believe one's been filed ever. They have let us in occasionally to take a look at them. And they do appear to be in fairly good condition. Typically when a building is vacant and it has any kind of visible structural issues, buildings and regulatory compliance will require the owner to do a structural report, but they've never had any issues like that. We have had several preservation architects take a look at them from the exterior, and they all come back with the same thing. Wow, they're in amazing shape. So there's no evidence that they're in any structural states of failure. There's a roof leak in one of them. I think it's 110. That's causing some of the plaster in one of the upstairs bedrooms to come in. But any home left unattended for years is going to have issues with the valleys and the slate and whatnot. So they are actually being maintained, not being maintained, I'm sorry, they're surviving despite no maintenance. There's very few code violations that have been noted for these, but members of the public are noting when there are broken windows or they've been broken into, and they are getting boarded up slowly when that happens. It's not usually very effectively, and it's usually just the first floor. But yeah, there's no requirement at this point for them to submit structurals. There's a question over here, and I'll get back to the middle. Yes.
Why did they stop renting? I mean,
The
why would-
party line is that they're really hard to rent to students. You don't get much in rent. Students do damage to the buildings and then they leave without paying the rent.
The doctors and,
Law school professors.
We've been trying to work with them since 2010 to rent them. There is a lot of interest in the buildings and reusing them for a variety of different reasons. The current rezone did not necessarily help them because the one thing that you cannot use them for at the moment is a single family home. However, with the current zoning, you can use them for literally anything else. In fact, at the Historic Resources Commission, the staff planner read the list, and it took her many minutes to get through the list of all of the different things that you can use these buildings for. And it's endless. Yes, in the middle.
Nice job doing the talk, by the way. Thank you. This is a question for you as well as maybe for the audience. I grew up in Western Massachusetts, just outside of Springfield, Mass, in a town called Long Meadow. Long Meadow has a development called Colony Hills with quite a few Tudors from this same era. I'm wondering, as I discover upstate New York in this area, if anyone here can tell me about other towns or streets specifically that have Tudors that were built around this same era of late 20s into mid 30s.
That's a way longer conversation. I can give you a website for that. Yes, Bria.
For people to go in, not just if they were in.
So that's the funny thing about these X's, right? They're being put on by the fire department, and they're kind of not being used for exactly what they're meant to do. So yes, they're meant, the red box with the white X means there are unknown structural problems in the building. If it is on fire, first responders should not enter the building because there are unknown, unsafe situations in those buildings. There is also a half slash that I think is used on 2 buildings. I saw a new one the other day. It was one before. That there are known issues, enter with caution. All vacant buildings are supposed to have some kind of placard if it's in decent shape. And there are no known or unknown issues. It would be a red box. Technically, the buildings should be inspected on the interior. There are no known or unknown structural issues with these buildings, so they should not have a red X on them. They do need to be registered as vacant, which they are because they are vacant and secured by other than normal means. But they actually do not meet the qualifications to have the X placard on them. Yes.
What is the square footage?
I don't know. I never calculated it. Sorry for those on Zoom. The question was, what was the square footage? And I don't know the square footage of that. Yes.
They have the electricity and the heat turned off?
Yes, the electricity and the heat are turned off to the buildings. The gas as well.
So for 14 years,
Mhm.
they've been vacant.
Yes, some for 20.
Taxes have to be paid?
Taxes are being paid on them. So that's a part of it, right? They're not being kept up on it, but the taxes are being paid on it. So they're not in that foreclosure path. And with New York State real property law, as long as they are maintaining them and there are no active code violations, the city cannot take them to court over it. They're registering them as vacant, which they're required to do. But unless there are more and more code violations that are happening that are then not being met, there's no avenue to get them into codes court or to force them to do anything with it. It's a bit convoluted.
And they're not registered in historic places or anything like that?
Funny you should ask about that. Wow, that's a great segue. No, not yet. There's actually what's called a determination of eligibility for the buildings for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. We did that in 2010 when they first became vacant. And then we renewed that again over this summer. What that means is that yes, they are eligible for listing on both the state and national register. If any state or federal money would be used to do anything with the buildings, whether it be rehab, demolition, whatever, there would need to be a review by New York State. The reason we did it is because there's a tax credit. If you're going to be rehabbing historic buildings, there's actually now a 50% tax credit for income producing properties. So there's a lot of carrots out there to reuse the buildings and not a whole lot of reasons to sit there doing nothing. So we did the determination of eligibility, but right now we are in the process of locally listing them, which actually provides the most protection. So if a building is being proposed to be demolished in a local historic district, it does not go to the planning board. There's a formal process that goes before the Historic Resources Commission. And it's not just, I want to demolish my building. It has to be a hardship. You cannot earn a reasonable return using your building for anything. You've tried to sell it and cannot sell it. You've tried to reuse it. You've been renting it. There's active C of Os and you cannot get rent out of your tenants. There's a history of evictions for unpaid rent and whatnot. You have to prove this is a massive hardship. And the only way forward for these buildings is to be demolished. They meet 0 of the qualifications for a hardship case, which is why we're pushing local listing. It also triggers a bit more code enforcement review and gives us a little bit more ground to try to get it into codes court. So that's where we're going with that. So I'll get to you just a second. So the process isn't finished yet. The next slide's the most important one. So this needs support. So there's no opposition or support rule for these buildings. If the owner opposes it, they can oppose it, and that's fine. But the Common Council can still vote to make this a historic district, even if the owner opposes it. But there needs to be overwhelming public support for these buildings to show that the public is interested in them, right? They're worthy of listing. It's not just the owners are complaining, well, I can't do anything with them, so why are these important? So everyone should be writing their Common Council member to support them. We have the website. There's a QR code that will take you to the website, and we'll be sending it to everyone.
It does like.
Fabulous, thank you. I try to test everything earlier, and there's only so many things you can get to in a day. But yes, so support to the Common Council member. Yes, this one then over here. Yes.
The question's been answered.
Oh, fabulous. Wonderful. Yes.
Several references to we and us, and I'm not clear whether you are talking about the city or historical Albany.
I'm talking about Historic Albany Foundation.
Okay,
Yes.
and then when you said the Peacocks have let us in.
Yes,
that's
they've let Historic Albany Foundation. To be fair, though, they have also let the City of Albany in. We've toured the building with the planning department, in addition to just ourselves. Historic Albany independently has been trying to work with the Peacocks since 2010 to put together different plans for reusing the buildings. We've brought in various entities that could either reuse them as they are, or worst case scenario, move them like around the corner, and reuse them. We've tried to look at absolutely every angle we can to kind of reuse them. And unfortunately, at this point, it's just been radio silence and they want to demolish them. So it's time to do a little bit more. One quick question from Zoom, and then I'll grab to the back. Someone want to know why they can't be used as veteran housing. There is no reason why they cannot be used as veteran housing. Yes.
Single family here? Does that imply that they've been divided up into apartments on this?
No, it doesn't actually. When they did the larger rezone for the whole city, the whole thoroughfare of Holland Avenue got rezoned. And do I remember what that zoning is? No, I don't. It's not highway commercial. It's like mixed use neighborhood community. It's a fringe. Yeah. Actually, you can argue it, right? It gets down to the attorneys. We would argue it does not, and that they were built as single family homes, and the fact that they are still can function as a single family home should not preclude them from being used as a single family home. You could also get a variance if it really became an issue. So while yes, the Peacocks are looking to use that as a reason why the buildings cannot be reused, no. Other questions? Yes.
Questions at the foundation. Have there, people come up with ideas of if the buildings were restored, then what? What would
Yes.
happen?
So we put together lots of that, lots of different ways that they can be reused, lots of different entities that would be really good end users. Just a few, very few of the examples are more Ronald McDonald House model for the VA. Fisher House is directly across the street, and they have a lot of needs for veterans who are coming great distances for services and really do need their families with them. So these homes would actually function perfectly using the Ronald McDonald House model with the VA. Because they do need more, or at least they had at the time. We've been talking with VA staff years ago. One of our board members actually was the head of the VA at the time. So we've been having a lot of discussions with them. So there's uses for that. There's even smaller uses. Obviously, the colleges are kind of a no-brainer. There's always lots of visiting faculty, whether it's for a fellowship or a grant-funded position. Faculty members move with their families. So there's lots of potential for housing for faculty, visiting staff, whatever. Scientists as well with Wadsworth, like there's a lot for that as housing, but also other services that would benefit the neighborhood. I say neighborhood because there are still a lot of people, whether they're students, whether they're patients, whether they're people who work at all of the hospitals, There's not a lot of places to get something to eat there, or even I don't want to say silly things, but other things, whether it's a dry cleaner or a nail salon or just offices, doctor's offices. You know, there's tons of different options. We've talked to a lot of different organizations and entities that take on larger projects. There had been some interest in the past. For years, we'd worked with both Habitat and Albany Housing Authority, because again, they're always looking for housing. Neither of them tended to work for a variety of reasons, but they were great in working with us to working through it with, okay, what's viable and whatnot. And there's also a lot of grant funding out there if you're rehabbing historic houses and reusing them. So yes.
Would parking be an issue for any mixed purpose building?
Yes and no. There's a massive parking lot behind it that is actually not fully occupied all the time. But also Albany needs to get away from surface parking lots. So if there is more and more and more need for parking, they need a parking structure instead of a parking lot. And then that structure, along with current best practices for planning, you have retail space and spaces people are using on the outside of that. So actually, it does not need to be prohibitive. Parking does not need to be prohibitive. Yes.
What was the one thing you said they couldn't be used for in this?
Technically, with the zoning, their single family occupancy is not listed as a use under the current zoning. But that would be a legal debate for whether or not you can use a purpose-built single family home as a single family home. Yeah. More questions. I know I missed a couple. Zoom. Lots of comments. Someone wants to know how we can put pressure on Peacock, either to shame them into selling or reusing the buildings. I can't encourage shaming publicly. However, though, we have been encouraging them to sell them. If they're not going to use them, there are lots of people. For a while, every time we put out our endangered list, I get many calls a week for, how do I buy them? Who do I make an offer to? And I'm like, I really wish it was Historic Albany, but it's not. And then I give them the contact for Peacock companies. One common thing that I point out is they're not actually owned by Peacock companies. They're maintained by Peacock companies, but they're actually owned by a trust of family members, which while highly semantic, does make a difference for selling it. Yes.
They want to sell it as
They don't want to sell it at all. They want the land. Yes, for medical arts building, apparently.
There should be bad noise background.
We're not going to boo, it's being recorded. Yes, question in the back.
I think these buildings sound interesting, that I'd really like to take a look at them, which begs the question, do you ever do house tours? And then before you can answer that, let's say that's a terrific idea. How would you, why not, that could be a one-off, but wait a second. If they're anywhere near as interesting as the way they're presented, different, I could see how that could be a permanent tour that, your historic types, I'm sure you can figure out a way that the 1930s. And these decisions that were made, these design decisions that were made for these individual rooms, just make the evolution of design be of building technology be an interesting thing. Now, obviously, there's huge issues, but has that something come up?
Yes.
Just make the bad noise. That's why.
For those on Zoom, the question was, has Historic Albany ever done tours of them inside and out? And if we thought about it, are we going to? Yes, definitely. We're not allowed to bring the public inside. We don't own them, and the Peacocks are not willing to let us do interior tours. However, we have done exterior tours of them. We actually do a short talk kind of similar to this. I don't do them, the city historian does, because he lives in a Leonard built house and loves to talk about Jesse Leonard and all the stuff he has about Jesse. So Tony Opalka does the tours for us. And so we usually start with a small talk at Albany Law, and then we walk over and all around the buildings, 100% trespassing. And looking in windows and whatnot. If you look on our Facebook page, you'll see lots of people on porches there for tours. We have not done one since the pandemic, but every time we start planning our Walkabout Wednesday tours for the summer, that's on my list. So we will get there. But interior tours, unfortunately, unless the Peacock companies decide to feel very generous, it would probably not be an interior tour. Yes.
I'll put on a local listing issue back to that
Mhm.
one. In terms of the status of that, so we historic resource commission has approved it. correct?
Yes, they have.
So it's now before the common council.
It needs to go before the Common Council, so we're trying to speed up the process of getting that onto the Common Council agenda.
It's not actually-
It hasn't been introduced yet. It needs to, my understanding is it needs to go to land use and planning first. I don't know, I don't actually know the full process of that. So Richard, any help you can give us with getting that accelerated would be fantastic. Yeah.
And then the council will put it in land use.
Yes, for those on Zoom, Richard was talking about the process of getting it through.
You know, council or any, they even is on their radar.
Do we know of any opposition from the council and is it on their radar? Yes, it is on their radar. Our staff and board have been talking with all of our council members and those who aren't as well to start talking about these buildings. So far, we have not had any opposition from the council. I wouldn't say we've had lukewarm responses. I think it depends on how hard the Peacocks push, right? Because all of the council members have also been receiving some feedback from the Peacock companies about how they feel about our nomination. But so far, we've had support from the Common Council members individually. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yes, it's the 20th. Oh my God, because today's the 17th. Yeah. This is what happens when you're part-time and have too many things going on, but thank you. Yes, it is this Sunday, the 20th, that we do have Russell Shorto coming to the New York State Museum. The end of this is how Historic Albany does obviously a lot of different things. Obviously advocacy work is only one small portion of what we do. Most of our day job is spent doing fun planning and tours. So in the summer, we do a lot of walking tours and we try to do fun interior tours of spaces that are not always available to the public, especially for our membership. So we do a lot of that. But next up for us this weekend, we have Russell Shorto coming to talk about the 400th of Albany and New Netherland. Because it is the 400th anniversary. Yay! So exciting. And I think the event that has taken up pretty much all of our mental bandwidth at this point. But also one of the most fun things that we do at Historic Albany is our Build Art Show and Art Auction that's coming up the first weekend in November. So I see some familiar faces that have been there. So I will see you with bell bottoms and polyester the first weekend of November. But it really is actually quite fantastic. We have almost 300 pieces of art that depict all different buildings across the city. For some reason, most of them are about the Tudors. I don't know why that is. But we have a lot of fantastic paintings and textile pieces that all depict these buildings. Like the public is really interested in them. Who knew? It's crazy. But yeah, so there'll be lots and lots of fantastic art focusing on Tudors and otherwise. So yeah, that's everything we have here. And I've gone way into my time. There's also an awesome art event happening here that I'm supposed to encourage everyone to go downstairs and check out on your way out. Yes, Bria.
Library, you've been inspired to want to fix up your house a little bit after seeing this.
Yes, we do. Not only do we do workshops on how to fix them, but then we can help you find the tools to do it. Yes.
The effort to bring back, you know what I miss? Every June on a Thursday night, there was a tour of Center Square and the home and garden tours.
Yes, yes.
It's been no.
No, they
The
were
Pine
stopping
Hills-
recording.
The Pine